In the small town of Black Hollow, there was an old mansion known as the Whitmore House, a crumbling relic at the edge of the woods. It had stood for over a century, with rumours swirling about its dark past. People claimed it was haunted, cursed, and many believed that no one who entered the house would ever leave the same. The house had been abandoned for years, but one stormy evening, a curious young man named Thomas ventured into the town. He was a skeptic, someone who dismissed ghost stories as mere superstition. His desire for adventure led him to seek out the infamous Whitmore House, against the warnings of the locals. As he stepped onto the property, the wind howled, shaking the branches of the trees like skeletal arms reaching toward him. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if something was watching him. Ignoring the unease settling in his chest, Thomas pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. The mansion loomed before him, its windows dark and empty, the once grand stonework now covered in ivy and decay. A rickety wooden door creaked open with a push, as if it had been waiting for him. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on the cracked floors. The air inside was colder, filled with a heavy silence that seemed to press down on him. Thomas noticed strange marks on the walls, faded symbols etched in blood-red paint. His heart raced, but his curiosity drove him forward, deeper into the house. As he moved through the hallway, a low whisper brushed against his ear. He froze. The voice was soft, almost a breath, but unmistakable. "Leave." Shivers crawled up his spine. He spun around, but no one was there. Only the empty, decaying house greeted him with its haunting stillness. The whispering grew louder, more persistent, following him like a shadow. "Leave now, or stay forever." Despite his fear, Thomas pressed on. He couldn't leave without knowing more. He entered the drawing room, where a large, dusty mirror hung on the wall. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. His eyes were wide with terror, his face pale, and the room seemed wrong. The reflection was twisted, as if it had been stretched and distorted by an unseen force. Suddenly, the whispering turned into voices, murmurs, screams, pleading cries that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Help us!" Thomas stumbled back, his pulse quickening. His mind raced. What was happening? Who were these voices? Before he could turn to flee, the temperature dropped drastically, and a shadow moved across the room. It was the shape of a woman, tall and gaunt, her hair long and matted, her face hidden in darkness. She floated toward him, her feet never touching the ground. "You shouldn't have come." Her voice rasped, a horrible sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Now you're one of us." Panic flooded Thomas's chest as he turned to run, but the door slammed shut in front of him. He backed away, desperate to find another exit, but the shadowy figure had surrounded him. The voices of the lost souls echoed in his ears, their wails growing louder and more frantic. "Stay with us." Suddenly, the house seemed to come alive. The walls groaned, the floors creaked underfoot, and the very air seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Thomas's legs shook, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He reached for the door, but the handle twisted out of his grasp, as if it had a mind of its own. The shadow reached out, her long, bony fingers brushing against his arm. As soon as her touch made contact, his vision blurred. His body felt cold, numb, and his limbs grew heavy. The world around him began to fade, and he could no longer remember why he had come, what he was doing there. All that remained was the suffocating, endless darkness. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the town of Black Hollow was quiet. The Whitmore house stood as it always had, silent and unmoving. The locals whispered that no one had seen Thomas since he entered the mansion. But if you stood near the house on a quiet night and listened closely, you might hear something faint, just a whisper in the wind. "Stay with us." And the house waited, as it always did, for the next curious soul to wander in.